Now that we finished the scene, what we're gonna do is export into a render and do the framing. For that, let's jump back into the sequencer. We have our sequence here. Check to the camera. Don't worry about this, this is the railing. So we're gonna press G to hide everything. I can check my animation. If you're happy with everything, so let me just delete a bunch of stuff here that I placed by mistake. So we have the door, this here, animated. I added a light here, but it's very not necessary. It's something I actually removed during the process. So we can just remove it, let it fixed. So the door, we have the cam, we have the rig. Make sure that we have 2 levels. So for that, remember, I right click, level visibility track, and you add. So what I did is ended up separating the geo from the lighting. So geo. So we have all the 2 levels here present. Now what we're gonna do, when you're ready to render, make sure it's 24 frames per second. You're gonna open this icon here. That's gonna allow us to render into a frame. You should have the cam 1, which is basically this sequence. If you don't have anything, you can just add it here from here. It's basically the level sequence that you can find here, that we created. Here, this is where the stuff become important. Let me add this bigger. So right now it's rendering a JPEG sequence that we're gonna change. The ferret rendering is basically the lit mode. Here you can add, if you needed, the clay render, the detail lighting, the lighting only, which basically is gonna render this one, which can be very cool for showreel and stuff. But for now, let's focus on the deferred render. You can add the detail lighting and just turn that off. For the JPEG, there is something that we're gonna try 2 things. The first is just rendering in sRGB, basically raw color. Unfortunately, when I tried to render this in OCIO, it didn't work, but I'm gonna show you both process. It might work on your hand, but for now, let's focus on sRGB. I still want to use EXR. If EXR doesn't work, there is one that I use a lot. It's the Apple ProRes. I'm gonna turn this one off. I can even delete it by pressing delete on the keyboard. What this one does is basically rendering the full gradient and allow us in DaVinci later on to have a 12-bit pictures. It's not perfect as an OCIO, but it's still very helpful if you want to do some proper DaVinci compositing. We're gonna leave all of these options by default. Now, something that are very important. To make sure that nothing is too optimized, we're gonna remove the game override option, which is basically gonna load the LODs and replace some of the props with lower versions. We're gonna leave it this by default. We're gonna leave this checked in, disable streaming, but here use LOD 0. We don't really need to do that, so you can disable it, because we're basically gonna disable the use of LODs, which also can be this one. Everything else stay as is. Then we're gonna add some anti-aliasing to make sure that the render looks very good. And in the anti-aliasing, the important parameters here is gonna be those ones here. I'm gonna use the temporal count of 60. It's like in V-Ray, you basically go from 1 to 16. I'm gonna override it because, as you say, it's not working with the actual setting that we have set in the project. It's totally fine. I'm gonna override it, leave that as none. And for some people, sometime, what I suggest you to do for the motion blur, An FX, if you added some FX, is to add a warm-up. So usually I do 32 and 32. What it's gonna do is gonna render 32 frames before, so it's gonna do minus 32. Render all of those to allow the motion blur on the depth of field and all FX that you have to work properly, and then start rendering from 0. The minus 32 is gonna be temporary, so it's not gonna be saved anywhere. So this is the main option that I use. You don't really need that for our case, but you can leave that on for now. Game override, we did it. And then there is something very important now. We're gonna add some console variables. What it's gonna allow us to do is to really tweak the engine and render what needs to be like high quality as motion blur, shadows, and GI. For that, I'm gonna create some console variable by just pressing an add element. And also for later down the road, I'm gonna start a console command. Let me explain you what does that do. This one, what I'm gonna do now is just use the global illumination. If you don't know the command, you can just R for rendering, dot ray tracing, and then we can start to find stuff here. So what I'm gonna do is ray tracing, point global, and then you can find the global illumination, and the one we're gonna gather is the sample. Should be sample per pixel. And this one we're gonna set it to 16. Remember that we're gonna render this in 4K, so you do want like very nice and crisp detail, as same as the shadows. The next one, so all of those values that I have here, you can find them in the text file that's just attached to this course. So you can just copy paste them and edit here. There is no problem at all. I'm gonna here add another one, tracing, this time for the reflection, the same, sample per pixel, and crank that up to 16. 16 sounds like the golden value in my case, it's worked very well. Then here we're gonna work on the shadows. Shadow, and this one is gonna be max resolution. And this one we're gonna do 4K resolution. It's gonna allow us to have very nice shadows that match the output resolution that you have in the sequencer, instead of having something optimized that might look not anti-realistic. Then we're gonna have a few, so bear with me here. We're gonna add R for rendering motion blur. And this one's gonna be the motion blur quality, usually 4. Then another one that I saw popping few times is the motion blur separable, and this one a value of 1. The next one you're gonna add is another shadow quality, so here shadow quality, and this one set to 5. All of those values that I'm giving here are the ones that work the best in most of the case. You might need to tweak some of them, but it should work in your hand. And then here the same, I'm gonna add depth of field, quality, and this one's gonna be 4. This one is important because we have lots of foreground and background elements. Then I'm gonna add a ray tracing, shadow sample, it's gonna do the same as those one, but this one doesn't need to be super crazy, just 8. it's gonna add more information into the shadows. And then for people that need, we can also add a shadow denoiser. This might be helpful if you have lots of grass on vegetation. For now, we're gonna leave it to 0. And those other start commands, it's something that I use a lot when I do vegetation rendering, grass on trees. So we're gonna add 3. And those one, it's basically allowing to render nanites, because sometimes you might have issues with nanite when the double-sided doesn't work properly and there is penetration of shadows. So for people that are interested, everything's gonna be here. You can just copy paste with a screenshot. And this is the one that's gonna allow us to force the double-siding on non-double-siding geometries. This one's gonna first to the foliage to render at like a very good quality depending on the location. So if it's far background, too closer. And this one, be careful, it's to allow us to render the maximum of triangles for the foliage, which means that it's gonna be limited by default. But if you have a giant forest, you might miss some of the bushes, trees, grass, plant. So to carry that on, and if you want to render everything, you need to use this one. So I'm gonna add those one. So ray tracing, shadow, I'm gonna add this one here. For now, I'm leaving to 0 to really force it. If you have issues, turn this one to 1, but you should not have any issues. Then I'm gonna add this one as well. And then the foliage that we are still using, but because we have way less and we are not really using any foliage system except for the stones, I'm gonna carry those one on. Those are mainly the value I use for every render that I'm doing. You can save it. As you can see here, I saved a bunch. So I have my whip render. These came by default. You might have those one. Then I have a RCRGB and a SSCG when I worked in OCIO system with like a proper LUT that we're gonna try later on. This one, like I said, didn't work in my case. I have no clue why he was not exporting the OCIO. But keep in mind that all of these presets here are tied to the project. So if I save those here, they're gonna appear in your content folder. You see here? So it's a bit annoying. The only way what I'm doing is I go to the structure folder and just show in Explorer and just copy this one in an empty folder somewhere, and I just drag and drop them. So at least I have it somewhere sitting. For the people that actually want to work in a proper VFX workflow, I suggest you to use this OCIO. So this step is not crucial for ending the project here. It's totally not necessary. In my case, like I said, it didn't work, but because we exported in Apple ProRes, it was enough. But if you want to work with proper color and color correction, I suggest you to work in OCIO, and for that it's quite easy. What it does is I suggest you to jump into this website, OpenColor.io. It's gonna give you proper LUT and stuff to get started, a bunch of explanation, and it's allow you to work with either V-Ray, After Effects, Blender, everything that you can use, even Photoshop, and in our case, Unreal Engine. I used it a lot in V-Ray before, prior to jump into Unreal. So I'm gonna give a link into the description where you need to download this kind of stuff, because before starting anything, we need to download the OpenIO color. And it's gonna be here, so I'm gonna send you this link here, and what you're gonna need to do is just download this file here. So when you're done downloading this, just extract it somewhere in one of the folders. It should not be in the project folder, but something accessible in case you want to use it with other apps like Blender or Maya or anything else. Now that we're back in Unreal, so for that, I'm gonna create a new folder in my contents here. So let's call it OCIO right there. Jump into it, and inside here you want to create into miscellaneous. We want to create an open OCIO here, this file, and we're gonna call it OCIO colors. Now double click, and this is where you're gonna want to load the config files here. So I'm gonna load the config IO that we just extracted. So to work in proper OCIO, we're gonna work in the desired display view or desired color space. For that, we're gonna start with the color space. So for that, I'm gonna add two render elements. The one's gonna be what we're gonna input inside Unreal as a texture, and the second one's gonna be the output toward DaVinci. Because we are importing everything into sRGB, what I'm gonna do is go to Utility and find the sRGB, Utility Linear sRGB, this one, because nothing is color corrected that we imported into Unreal. Basically, it's a standard color correction on every program that you have right now on your computer. It's gonna be sRGB. Every texture you're working on are sRGB, your render is in sRGB. It's a default config of Windows on the environment of the color correction. It's also the same as Unreal. This is default in sRGB. So we're gonna convert this now to the linear SSCG. So we're gonna go to ASYS and SSCG. So what we're gonna do is basically importing sRGB, converting to SSCG. So you can now save this. So now it's very easy. You just have to go back here into the render movie queue. But what I'm doing here, I added a color output. And for this is very easy. So if you don't have it, you just go here, color output, and here we're gonna find the SSCG that we just created. And we're gonna do the same here that we did in the color correction. So Utility Linear sRGB, and the destination on the export is gonna be SSCG. Basically import, export. Now what we're gonna do is just enable it. So now you work in proper SSCG. So you're gonna click accept. Here I'm working in AXR, make sure it's 16 bits in the piece format. Click accept, and now you can do your render and you should be in OCIO. You can also work in OCIO in the viewport here, and for that you go to the lit mode here. I'm gonna go toward OCIO, enable. So I'm gonna pick this one, linear. And what it's gonna do is gonna export something like this. So to actually correct the black and white when you work with OCIO, it's quite easy actually. So let's enable it again. Let's do this. So linear SSCG. As you can see now, we're pretty dark here. So to correct it, you have to go to the OCIO that we created. And here in the desired display, you have to add ESS. You have a bunch here to select. If you want to really work correctly, I suggest you guys to work with the Rec 709, or you can work with the RAW, but the RAW is gonna be the same, pretty dark. So instead of you tweaking the lights on the value on everything again and get back and forth like we did previously, the closest one that you can get is the Rec 709. So you activate this one, you save it. And now if you go to here, I'm gonna clear this up, select this one back. So it's better to completely clear that out and select the new one. But now I'm working with the proper SSCG. So we're working with sRGB coming in and SS coming out. But as you can see, it's a little bit washed out, but this is not a super biggie. This is not something I used at the end for the project because I didn't want it to deal with the color, but this is the proper SS workflow. And if you want to go even further, what you should be doing is turn all of this texture into Rec 709. So for that, it's very easy. Let's go back to here, for example. Open up the texture. And here, it's very important into the source color. Let me make this bigger. In the color space, you have to turn this into Rec 709. It's gonna take some time, and now you have the proper workflow. So the thing is, you work in inputting everything in sRGB, but converting into Rec 709 to have the proper OCIO color correction, but you have to convert only the albedos. You only convert. So I made a simple texture here for you to understand. Only this one plugged to the base color must be Rec 709. The rest, ORD, normal, everything else should be in none, which is basically when you work in VFX, the raw. None here. And this is how you get proper OCIO structure in your workflow. But because it was a bit tedious and I realized that I didn't started working with the OCIO system, I decided to not use it here because I liked the contrast that I had hit a bit better. You can easily find this in DaVinci, there is no problem, but I didn't want to deal with, oh, I have to retweak the contrast and stuff like this, so I disabled at the end of the day the OCIO in my render. That's why for the next one I created the OCIO, and then the sRGB. sRGB, it's when I don't want to deal with any color correction. And then the OCIO, that's when I want to have the proper workflow here. And of course, you pick this one, linear SSCG. It's a bit complex, I know, it's a lot of information, but like I mentioned just before, this is totally not necessary for now. As long as you're happy with what you have here, that your camera has proper value, make sure that before exporting, you go to the camera exposure, which is basically the same as we have in the scene outside. Like if I go outside, it's the same, they all look the same. And then that the camera, make sure that it match the preset that we generated prior in the post process. So 100, 100, and 80. And they're all gonna match. And then you can reapply the config. And then from there, make sure everything's good. Defer rendering, anti-aliasing, it's the same as I just showed you. Console variable. I have my game override. I know I work in 4K, which is tied to my project here. And then I picked my path. And then 24 frames per second. Pick the proper frame rate. And then you can hit accept. And now you can run there. And you're gonna have 1-to-1 match. And now you can either render remotely. That means if you have like a bunch of computers tied together, or just locally, which in our case we're gonna do locally. And now he's doing the warm-up of the 32 frame that we set before. You see them here, the warm-up. So he's not gonna move, it's not gonna be fixed. Don't worry about that. And it's quite fast because we don't have any FX or anything. But now it starts to render. So you see the subsample. This is what it's doing with subsampling the motion blur on the depth of field to add way more quality to it and remove all of the noise that we might have. So depending on the computer that you have, it might take some time. As you can see here, it's still half an hour for like a bunch of pictures. It's gonna drop. I believe it took me like, actually in real time, it took me like 12 minutes to render because we're already at like 20 frames. And yeah, you just let it render, and at the end you should have some framing. So I'm gonna cut that here and go back to the end when it's finished. Yeah, you just let it render, and at the end you should have some framing. So I'm gonna cut that here and go back to the end when it's finished. So when it's rendered, you should have a few files. So what I did is I rendered the lit, the lighting mode, and the nanite. So we can check that back in DaVinci quickly. Remember that it's 4K, so that's why it's a bit laggy. It's still lots of information. So depending on the situation, you might want to render in 2K, which is 2560 by 1440. That might be more helpful for you. But if you can render in 4K, I suggest you to do.